On the front of your bulletin this morning is the text that I would like to use. It is from the 21st chapter of Revelation, next to the last book in the Bible. The last book in the Bible next to the last chapter in that book. See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. In January of 1992, Time magazine carried an article. It was called Corridors of Agony. It told about the children in this country, small children, often caught up in the agonies of survival, and in the juvenile court systems in the United States. Told the story of a little boy who was 10 years old, whose mother constantly warned him, stay away from the parks. You can't go there to play all day because of the drug dealers. Because she knew what those drug dealers did, you know. If the police started to close in and they had drugs with them, they chose the smallest child they could find to put those drugs on, so that the police would arrest that child or ignore that child because he was so small they wouldn't even think about it. So she said, stay out of the parks. But you know, sometimes mothers' pleas and warnings go unheeded. So he played in the park. And one afternoon, a group of men dealing saw the police closing in and quickly pushed into his socks all the drugs that they had. Although the police saw what they were doing, fortunately, technically they arrested the 10-year-old. The article carried another story about two little girls, one 6 and one 10, sexually abused by their father. Their agony and suffering is so bad that one does not discuss that even from the pulpit. But the 6-year-old sits with a little doll, holding it to her, and it plays. If you wind it up, it's a small, small world. And then they interviewed two little boys, brothers, 9 and 11. Their mother is a cocaine addict. She said she loves her children, but they had to be taken away from her and put in foster homes. But they couldn't be put in the same foster home. And so they were separated, 9 and 11, and the 9-year-old couldn't bear that separation from his brother. He was all he had. And so he does not eat and does not sleep. And he sits with an old shopping bag under his arm, filled with his clothes, waiting to go back home. And in the visiting of that first child, that 10-year-old, when they went into that home, there was a light bulb hanging from the ceiling, the only bulb that they owned. And when they left one room and went to another, they took the bulb out and took it with them to the next room and put it in the socket. And he said, the reporter said, as they moved from room to room carrying that light bulb, screwing it in, there was a poster on the wall. And the poster was of a child crying. And underneath the bottom of the poster were these words, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell in and be their God. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them. And he will wipe every tear from their eyes. And there will be no more mourning and crying and pain. Let me give you a contrast, at least, to those pictures. A contrast of another family, more like us in what we know. The father loved roses, and he really worked in his rose garden. And he was a family man, and he came home every afternoon, and he put on his overalls, and he went out and he worked among those roses, and when he got through, he came in, and the family ate together, and they shared together things. For 5 years, he won the blue ribbon when they took the roses in for competition. Everybody knew he was going to win it again. He had it all ready. Had a little boy, just a little toddler. And they were eating breakfast the morning that they got ready to take to the rose show. And the little boy came rushing into the kitchen, clutching a rose in his hand. And he said, "Daddy, guess what I got for you?" It was the prize rose. The petals all gone, the head all bending over of the rose. There went the rose show. No. You know what Dad did? He put the picture of that toddler on a stick, and he stuck it in that container where that rose was going to be. And he took it to the rose show. And under it, he put the story of what happened to the rose. And he got an honorary blue ribbon that day for what happened. He got his blue ribbon. But you see, there are all kinds of life out there. Some of it's like us. Some of it we choose not to think about or to know about. But the text this morning says, okay, wipe the tears away. Let people know that God is with them. Take the pain and the mourning and the suffering away. But you know who has to do that? We do. He really depends on us to bring to reality the text from the book of Revelation. Oh, that's talking about maybe sometime when he's going to come? No, because he's already here. And some of those things, if they happen in the world, you and I will have to do it because that's what he's called us to do. I know that you've heard this little reading before, but it's worth hearing again. I was hungry, and you discussed my hunger. Thank you. I was innocent and in prison, and you prayed for my release. Thank you. I was naked, and you discussed my appearance. Thank you. I was sick, and you knelt and thanked God for your health. Thank you. I was homeless, and you preached to me the shelter of the love of God. Thank you. I was lonely, and you prayed for me. Thank you. You are so holy, so close to God, but I am still very hungry and lonely and naked and homeless and in prison and cold and without Christ in my heart. It's great to pray for folks, and we ought to be ashamed if we don't. But if that's all we do, it's not enough. The prayer ought to take us from our knees to simply be the springboard that puts us into action to reach out to somebody else. Somebody has said the most satisfying thing in the world is to do something for somebody else. That's the most satisfying thing in the world. This week I thought, I am tired of looking at the Los Angeles riots on TV. I don't want to see that anymore. Well, maybe that's tough that I don't want to see it anymore. Maybe I ought to have to see it. And maybe they ought to throw it up there every time I sit down to eat and don't want to see that because I'm tired of seeing it. However, Every time they show that trucker, and we mentioned this last Sunday night, but I'm going to say it again. Every time we see a picture of that trucker in the street, I wish they would also show another picture right behind it of the woman who was watching that happen on television a few blocks from that intersection and who got up out of her house and went to that intersection and crawled in the running board of that truck after that man got back into it and guided him out of that part of the city to safety because he could not see where he was going. She took her life in her hands when she did that, but she did it. And I wish they would show that every time they show that other picture of what that woman did. There was a man once who was hunting butterflies because that was his passion. And he went to Utah to a friend where you could find butterflies everywhere. And he was out hunting butterflies one day with his net. And that night about dark when he got back home, he had these beautiful butterflies. And he said to the man he was visiting, you know, while I was down by the gulch today, down by the creek, I heard somebody moaning and groaning down there on the ground. And the man said, did you go see about it? He said, no, I would have missed the butterfly. The next morning, they found an old prospector's dead body down by the creek. They renamed it. It was called Bear Gulch. It's now called Dead Man's Gulch. But you see, there was not just one dead man there that day. There were two. One was down laying on the ground by the creek, and the other one was running about with a net catching butterflies, but they were both dead. You know, we're all on health kicks today, and that's good. We ought to be. I try to walk. We try to do all kinds. You know what I read this week? Do you know what a health study recently proved? Do you know what contributes more to long life than walking, running, and oat bran? You know what they said? What contributes more than any of those things? Volunteer work for others. They proved that people who are involved in volunteer work, helping others, add years to their lives. When London was bombed during the war, do you know what they discovered? People with nervous disorders got well, I thought. You'd think that would make them worse, wouldn't you? If you had a nervous disorder and you're caught in a bombing, you know, they got better. You know why? They had to forget themselves and start helping people all around them affected by the bombing. Many of them got well. You know what they tell us? That everybody needs 12 hugs a day. You get 12 hugs a day? Is that too much? You know, you get away from me, you know, that's too many hugs, 12 a day. Well, at least we need a couple every day, and we don't give that. Some of us get more than we give, but they say 12 a day. Do you know about bank accounts? You got a bank account? I got a piece of one. You know about putting things in the bank and taking things out of the bank? You know about deposits and withdrawals? There is an emotional bank account, which every one of you have. When you are kind to another person, you deposit something in the bank account with that person. Every time you are unkind, you make a withdrawal from that bank account. Are you overdrawn with anybody? When you make promises, you deposit into the emotional bank account. When you break a promise, you make a withdrawal. Are you overdrawn? Or is everything looking good? When you're loyal to somebody, you deposit into the bank account. When you're disloyal, two-faced, you take it out. You withdraw. When you do something that's wrong and you go and apologize to somebody because you did it, you put a deposit in the bank account. When you didn't, you withdrew. Now you tell me this morning how the bank accounts are. Is it just looking real good? Or are you overdrawn? Lucy and Peanuts, just weeping and wailing. Her mama promised her she could have a birthday party, and now she said she can't have one because she misbehaved, and she's just screaming and crying, and Linus says, Lucy, go tell your mama, Mama, I know that you promised to let me have a birthday party and I was bad, and now you say I can't. And I know I was bad, and I deserve it. And I'm going to try the next time just to be as good as I can. He said, that's what you go say to your mama. And she said, I'll die first. You ever feel like that? Well, you just withdrew when we feel like that. We make no deposits. We make a withdrawal. I'll die first. Well, there's an awful lot of people out there who really aren't without clothes and who have homes. But you know, those people suffer too sometimes and have all kinds of emotional needs that we as neighbors and Christians can help meet. You don't just have to be literally in jail and literally without clothes and literally without a house. You can have all kinds of problems that you and I can respond to, and when you do, you make a deposit in the bank account. When you don't, you make a withdrawal. I suggest to all of us that we check the emotional bank accounts and see if it's okay or if you are overdrawn. And if you are overdrawn, then you know what happens to you at the bank when you get overdrawn? You get in trouble. If you're overdrawn, it's not going to be very pleasant. And go do something about it. Our Father, we thank you for sharing with us life as it ought to be. Help us as Christians to be aware of things we can do and ought to do because we are your family. And for that reason, we're responsive Christian people.